I hope everyone is doing well tonight. I'm Colleen. I am the events coordinator for Island Books. I am super excited to see how many people are here to listen to Brad talk about his brand new book. In case you aren't familiar with Brad, Brad Chase has had a broad and extensive business career working with businesses of all sizes, but most notably working with Microsoft. And we welcome him as he shares his book based off of his fantastic lecture that he's been giving for the past few years, Strategy First. And we thank him so much for joining us. So in conversation with him is going to be Victor Rachis, who is the significant other and co-owner of Lori Rachis and the co-owner of Island Books, in case you didn't know. Together, they're going to chat about Brad Chase's book and its relevancy to the state of today's world and technology and just all sorts of things. I'm really excited to actually hear what they have to say. So just as a note, before I turn it over to them, there will be a question asked by Brad with an opportunity to win a free book. We will ask that you type your answers into the chat, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click that little speech bubble that says chat, you can type your answer in there. And the first person to put in the correct answer will win a book. Otherwise, once we hit the Q&A session, I will also ask that you put your questions into chat, and then I can feed them to Brad and Victor, and we'll be all set. Okay, thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Brad and Victor.
All right, I'm super excited. I'm looking at all of these little squares in Zoom, and I recognize a lot of these names. It's a little bit like homecoming, and seeing all these people from different parts of our lives. I was telling Brad at the beginning of this, we have at least one international participant, Tots Nihang, who used to be a Mercer Island resident and is still a huge Mercer Island fan. So good to see you, Tots, and good to see a lot of other people from various parts of my life, and I'm sure various parts of Brad's life, as well as people who are super excited about this book. So welcome, Brad. I think the one thing that Colleen didn't mention, because she probably doesn't know, is you and I worked together over 25 years ago. So we've known each other for over 25 years, and we were just reminiscing that neither one of us has aged a bit. We look fantastic. So welcome, Brad. It's really great to be doing this with you.
Well, my pleasure to be here.
So to kick it off, I just wanted to just start out and just talk a little bit about the book and writing the book. Why write a book? What was it that motivated you to write a book? You've had all kinds of success in your career. What was it that said, I need to put this to pen to paper and write a book?
Well, okay. First, I want to thank all my family or friends and folks I don't know to the chat. To answer your question, I didn't intend to write a book. I started doing strategy speeches a few years ago. And after my speeches, people from the audience kept coming up to me and saying, "Where's your book? Where's your book?" And I'm like, I don't have a book. And then after enough people said that, I finally decided, well, I've never done this before. It's a little scary, but I guess I'll give it a try.
So in writing the book, so thinking back, what was the biggest surprise about writing the book? Obviously, you had the COVID crisis, and I'll ask about that in a little bit. But just in terms of the process of writing a book, what was the most surprising and unexpected thing?
How hard it was is definitely the most surprising thing. I had spoken to friends, like my friend Jim, who used to live on the island. We would talk about doing the book and how hard it would be. And friends like Jim and another friend of mine from New York named Mike, and my wife Judy, they would encourage me. But, I didn't realize how hard it was. I even actually hired someone to help me write the book because I had no expertise and thought I should work with someone who had, written books before. So I did that. But even with his help, it ended up to be a lot more work and a lot more difficult than I realized.
did you have a process? So did you sit in front of a computer every single day and say, I'm going to crank out, I don't know, 10 pages, 15 pages, whatever. What was, what was the discipline around this?
Yeah, so it started with agreeing on the outline for the book. And fortunately, because I had done the talk so many times, I had a pretty good outline of what I talk about in the details of how the outline should work. So once the outline, we played around with some other outlines, but ended up coming back to what I do in my talk. And so then once we did the outline, then it was sort of a chapter by chapter thing, and you'd go through a few chapters, and collaborate with the person helping me, and sometimes I wrote most of it, sometimes he wrote some of it, and we went back and forth until sort of we got there, and then stuff was edited along the way after sort of I turned in the first draft to the publisher. And it turned out that, interestingly enough, that what I turned into the publisher versus what it ended up being the final book were materially different.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was struck by when I read the book, you had a fantastic career in technology. I was expecting a book that had a lot more tech examples. And the thing that I really appreciated and enjoyed was just the breadth of company examples that you use throughout the book. And I'm just wondering, how did you get that kind of knowledge across all kinds of industries? I'll tell you, after reading the book, I know more about the U.S. Postal Service than I ever knew before, which is kind of cool.
Right. Well, so there were a couple things. My goal for the book was to make strategy practical and understandable, and to reinforce its importance. And so I didn't want an academic book, and I didn't want an intellectual book. That was a very specific goal I had. And then, as a part of that goal, to support that goal, I wanted a variety of business cases from around the U.S. and, if possible, a few from outside the U.S. And I wanted to get a good set of diversity, so it wasn't sort of all white male case studies, companies. And so it just took a lot of research, and so I did a lot of research. The person helped me did some research as well. And then in a few cases, because I knew people, I was able to get help from materially significant people. So, for example, I knew, casually the ex-CEO and the guy who really built Costco. So after I wrote the Costco story, I asked him to take a look at it. I got connected to the CEO of Geico. And so after I wrote the Geico story, he reviewed it for me. So in some cases, I got help and, expertise added from people who could review the story and make sure I didn't have any errors. And remember too that I've been doing this speech for a number of years. So over the years, I had accumulated stories as well.
Got it. I know you wrote a blog post about this, but I think people would be interested. Tell me about how you came up with the cover, and let me actually, for the people who haven't seen the cover yet, this is the book being launched tomorrow. So tomorrow is the big launch. Tell me the evolution about the cover.
So I'm super excited about the cover, and there's a story behind it. So when I first started doing my talks, I hired someone to help me with the presentation slides. And because the model in the book is this fun takeoff on Albert Einstein's famous relativity equation, E equals mc squared, she said, well, why don't we do a chalkboard theme? Because there's all these iconic photos of Albert Einstein in front of a chalkboard. So we did, and the presentation has gotten a lot of rave reviews, the design of it. So when I decided to do the book, and I was working with the publisher, I said, let's incorporate the chalkboard theme into the book as well. And that was sort of the basis on which they built the book. And they actually asked me to provide them a number of covers that I liked. And I didn't like a lot of business covers, so I found some business book covers I liked, and some fiction covers I liked. Like, I found I liked things that were sort of simpler and more dramatic. And so those two pieces of information ended up being what drove the design. And then they, of course, provide you a bunch of designs. You pick what you like, you rev it, and you go through some cycles. And then the chalkboard theme is throughout the book as well. The same kind of diagrams I use in my presentation front each chapter. So every chapter starts with, you know, a sort of a graphic of a drawing that's on a chalkboard that symbolizes what's in the chapter.
Very cool. So owning a bookstore, Lori and I see a lot of people who come in who are either aspiring writers, they want to write a book. What's the advice that you would give someone who's looking to write a book, having gone through the process?
I would first say that you've got to decide what the vision is and the bet you're going to make with your book, just like I'm sure lots of other people do. In my case, I had a very clear vision. I wanted a book that focused on the importance of strategy, what strategy is, and how to be successful building a strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, in a non-academic and non-intellectual way. So make it really practical. So I guess my advice would be, first off, know what you want to, where you want to go at the end of the road before you sit down to write the book. But of course, I am not the expert. Having written my first book, it's a business book, so it's nonfiction, obviously. I won't claim to have any monopoly on the best strategies for writing successful books.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so you write a book, you go through a bunch of revs, you get a great cover, the whole bit, and then COVID hits. So, and I think when you on your blog, you talk about an infected book launch. Tell me about how COVID affected this and this book launch, and tell me about how you had to change your own strategy for launching this book.
Yeah, so I was done with the book, basically writing the book at the end of December. And as a consequence, when COVID hit, it was really a challenge. Because who wants to have a book come out in the middle of a major health crisis and not have the book address it at all? That felt sort of tone deaf. But at the same time, based on sort of the process and how it works, I didn't really have a lot of options. I could push the launch out until the fall, or I could keep the launch the way it was. And I ultimately decided that trying to fight the election and every other product that had been pushed to the fall, that I should keep it to where it was. And we managed to add a couple of sentences into the book in a section I call Adapt to the Tides, where I talk about how strategy has to be cognizant of all the swirling tides, whether they're demographics or environmental or economic. And we could go over that more later. And obviously COVID is, not just a little tide, it's a tsunami. And so I put a little thing in the book saying, hey, see my blog, basically, see my website for more information. This crisis hit just as my book was going to print.
Got it. Okay, so I want to get into the meat of the book, but as promised earlier, I know that when you give your talk, you always start with a question. And so what I want to do is I want to ask you to ask our audience here the question that you always ask. And Colleen, if you could just quickly repeat the instructions on how people can answer. First correct answer, we have a free copy of your book. So, and again, you can't have my last name or Brad's last name to win. So you're excluded.
So we're just going to ask everyone to answer the question in the chat. You can find it down at the bottom. You click on the button with the speech bubble. It can be to everyone. It can be directly to me, whatever you feel comfortable with. But whoever has the first correct answer will win a book. Now, you can also purchase a book later, but the winning the book is the fun part. So There you go.
Okay, so with that, Brad?
Yeah, they'll both be fun. So before I do my talks, I ask people to step back before I get into the meat of the talk. And I ask them sort of a simple question. What do you think is most important to the success of a business or a business leader? And then people raise their hands and answer the question, and we have discussion about it. So in this case, I guess you go to the chat and put down what you think the answer is.
We'll give people a
Drum roll, please.
A chance to respond. I've already seen one correct answer.
Victor, you gave it away.
I gave it away?
Yeah, if there's already a correct answer, who else is going to answer?
Yeah. My mistake. Pick from the numerous answers that are flying across.
I guess I could see what people are saying. I could look in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any more answers coming? Colleen, you tell me when we're ready to announce a winner.
I think we should say we should just go for it. No more need to wait if we're going with the first answer.
All right. Okay.
Now I'm noticing I'm going to give away the storm here. So give away the secret here. So I'm looking at the chat, and the two people who answered right are two people who have gotten early copies of the book because they helped me out.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'm not sure you can count them.
We're going to eliminate those two. So
yeah. And interesting enough, well, you might not be able to eliminate this two because no one else got it.
Oh, well, but that actually, I think plays perfectly into your question, doesn't it?
Yes. So whenever I give this talk, I have a big slide in the back behind me, and it says strategy first, or it has other stuff on it, but the word strategy is on there. The book is called Strategy First. Of course, everyone probably in the call knows the book is Strategy First. Yet for some reason, when I ask people what's most important to the success of a business or a business leader, people don't answer strategy. But then I talk about it and people understand why. You could have great people. You could have a terrific culture. You could have a strong set of priorities. You could have a good set of values. You could know your customers well. You could be charismatic and creative. But all those things don't matter, at least in my view of the world, unless you have a winning strategy. If you don't make the right bets as a business person and don't execute on those bets well, then you won't succeed, even with a great culture or great people and great purpose and good share value one person put here and so on. So my main point to stress is that all those things in business are very important. All those things in leadership are very important. But nothing is more important to the success of a business than building and winning strategy. Strategy is the anatomy of business success.
Perfect. So now let's get into the meat of things. Let's talk about the framework, and you touched on it a little bit with the equation, but let's actually delve into that and kind of what is your strategy formula? And you want to go into some detail on what that is? I know that you laid it out earlier.
Yeah, let me talk about that. So first, I want to stress what strategy is. And simply defined, strategy is your plan to compete and achieve whatever business goals you have for your business. That's all strategy is, your plan to compete. And your plan to compete always involves many bets. And we all make bets every day, whether it's, bets on, vacations, bets on what jobs are going to take, bets on our career. And in business, we always make bets. And most companies generally have one fundamental bet, sometimes more than one if they're a bigger company especially. But in most cases, they have one fundamental bet. And there's three key components of strategy that should inform that fundamental bet. And those three key components are execution, market potential, and customer value. And to help remember that, I use the model, the strategy first model, E times MC squared. Strategy equals E times MC squared. And it's just a mnemonic. The E stands for execution, the M for market potential, and the C for customer value. And the C is squared because in most strategies, the value you provide your customer is by far the most important. And one last key thing is that your strategy only matters relative to your competition. So that's a nice sort of also similarity with Einstein, since his theory is called the theory of relativity. So E times MC squared, E for execution, how you run your business every day, M for market potential, how much profit is in your sort of potential in your strategy, and see what value do you provide your customers in an absolute sense, not just like, having a lower price, but total value, and how that all weighs relative to competition is the strategy first model or formula.
So in your experience, what's the most neglected or overlooked portion of that formula?
In my experience, it's the customer value, which is why having it squared is nice. It's really important to have customer obsession, to be totally focused on what makes your customers happy or delighted. And it's quite common for many businesses, especially as they get larger and get further and further away from the customer, to lose sight of what they're doing to provide value for customers. Now, all that said, I think execution is underappreciated too. You could have a great strategy and a great bet, but if you execute poorly, you won't succeed. Now, on the other hand, if you execute well on a bad bet, you also won't succeed. So that's why the two are so linked to successful business outcomes.
And there's a quote in the book that you use from Morris Chang. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't actually remember the exact quote, but he basically says that you can't,
I've got the quote. It says, "Without strategy, execution is aimless. Without execution, strategy is useless."
Thank you. I think that's well said. That's why I put it in, and I use it in my talk actually too, so I should remember it. But yeah, the two go side by side. Make the right bets relative to the competition, execute them well. That's the key to strategy success.
Now, another thing that you talk about in the book is change, and both there's change in terms of finding customer value, but there's also external factors that affect a business. You want to touch on those and kind of the various types of change in each of those categories?
Sure. So in the book, I talk about 5 key tips, I'll call it, that help you, sort of build winning strategies, help you build great execution, market potential, and customer value. And the first one that you were talking about is to seek change. Change is always a strategic opportunity, whether it's, lots of companies taking advantage of the web, whether it's new business models like Costco, helped pioneer and Price Club many years ago, whether it's innovation, new products that find a completely new way of doing something, whether it be something like a new sort of type of buyer or a new market. All these are types of change. And I give lots of examples about this. When, for example, the NCAA started doing March Madness, then, back in the early days, it wasn't a big deal. But nowadays, well, COVID accepted, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. They basically created a market from scratch. And that's an example of how they sought change. Warby Parker, these glasses I'm wearing right now are from Warby Parker. They recognized that there was an opportunity to provide glasses online and also to sort of provide glasses that were pretty high quality at a more affordable price. Most people don't know that when they go to like a Sunglass Hut or one of these other places, the glasses are the reseller, and all the glasses inside are actually owned by the same company. So they saw an opportunity, they took advantage of it. Amazon innovated with AWS is another example of their cloud-based software product. So there's lots of examples of change that people can take advantage of in order to build a great strategy.
Perfect. The third pillar of your framework is about climbing short walls and building tall walls. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, of course. So climbing short walls just says get into businesses where the barriers aren't too high. Sort of practical, not surprising. Building tall walls is about how you create opportunities for your customers to be more loyal to you. And there's lots of different tall walls. There are marketing tall walls, which say a frequent flyer program or hotel points or something like that. There are product tall walls, often called network effects. So for example, if you use an iPhone, you might use FaceTime, you might have AirPods, You use lots of different apps. All those things are additions to the iPhone ecosystem, let's call it, that make it harder for you to switch away from the iPhone. When we built Windows, we added Windows apps. And as we added more Windows apps, more people wanted to use Windows, and then more people wanted to build Windows apps. And that virtuous cycle is similar to the iPhone model of a network effect that builds loyalty. So you could do that lots of different ways. There's patent tall walls, there's execution tall walls. It's hard, there's only a couple companies, Boeing and Airbus, that build large commercial aircraft. Why? Because there's tall walls. The tall walls being the expertise that's needed, the incredible capital that's needed, and so forth. So one of the things I encourage people when they build their strategy is think about how they can build tall walls for their product or their strategy.
Yeah. So when we think about short walls, tall walls, and all the changes happening in the world, what are some areas of change in business that you're keeping your eye on, where you look at and you're like, that's an opportunity?
Well, I mean, COVID is game changing, obviously, and I'm not telling anybody here anything they don't know. But that will devastate some businesses. It will be an opportunity for others. I mean, look at you. You have you're a local bookstore in Mercer Island, but you have people calling in from the Bay Area, from overseas, right? You have sort of an opportunity to think about how you grow your business in new ways, which has sort of been triggered by COVID. And the COVID crisis is going to change sort of how we dress and how we work. So more work at home, for example, more casual clothing. Probably it's going to increase automation. It's probably going to reduce globalization. There's all these things that are going to happen because of COVID that are going to create opportunities and also impact a lot of businesses negatively.
Got it. I think you touched on this a little bit when we started talking about the framework, but I think it would be worth repeating and emphasizing. And you finish up the book talking about your 5 tips around, or five key tips around execution. You want to cover those?
Right. So in addition to the 5 tips about, which we talked about some of them about how to build a winning strategy, I also have a number of tips about how to execute well. It starts with goals, not surprisingly. You have to know where you're trying to drive to get there. So all companies should have a set of business goals that, are profit, customer size, internal goals, like how you want to treat your people, maybe diversity goals. You're going to have a certain set of goals that you want to employ. And then once you set your goals, you have to have a set of principles that help you drive what you want from your company. Someone talked about in the chat earlier about the importance of culture, right? Well, that's how you help build your culture, is know the principles that you stand for. I want to be innovative. I want to be customer focused. We could talk about lots of different goals. Lots of different principles that are really important. So once you have your goals and your principles, then you have to have your priorities. And generally, when you build a business and you're executing, you do thousands of things. I'm sure every day at Island Books is full of many things you're doing. But there's 3 to 5 that matter the most. And those are what I would call your priorities. When Steve Jobs built the iPhone, he knew that he had to get the user experience right in order to be successful. If he didn't get the user experience right when he executed, then it wouldn't really matter a lot of the other things he did. So those are your priorities. And then lastly, you need to act. And that's the verb, like act and get stuff done. But it's also another mnemonic. I tend to like these, I guess. ACT stands for align, communicate in culture, and track to improve. Align is about aligning your resources and putting your most important people on your biggest priorities, making sure that you have an adequate budget for your most important priorities, aligning the organization around the strategy, and so forth. Communicate is about communicating to everyone what the strategy is. It's actually shocking, if you look at the research or work with companies like I have, how often you go to a company and ask people what their strategy is, even asking executives, and they'll tell you they don't know or they don't necessarily agree what the strategy is. I've had situations where you talk to an executive team and everybody on the team will tell you differently what the strategy is. So communication of the strategy is really important so people could execute on it. And then you want to build the culture you want. Satya at Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, has been talking a lot about how you build a culture to achieve what he wants to achieve at Microsoft. And finally, strategy is not fixed in time. So you have to track to improve on a regular basis. Look at your strategy, look at the results, and then make adjustments. Sometimes you can make smaller adjustments, and sometimes you have to reset your strategy altogether.
So let's talk about some real world examples. So why do you think that the Tesla Cybertruck is a strategic mistake?
Yeah, that was like my first blog post, I think. Probably no one ever read it.
It's not the first, but it's kind of near the first.
So Tesla has done an incredible job with the company, and you know, Elon Musk is sort of a wild card, but he's also built a great product. But I don't really understand why it's a good strategy to build a truck that is more of a niche product. Most of the people I talk to, and if you look at survey results, the general reaction to the unique design of the Cybertruck, and if you haven't seen it, it looks like something from a science fiction movie. It's the Tesla Cybertruck is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's all metal, and it's very futuristic looking, like it's from Blade Runner or something like that. And it's not very attractive to most people. There's a set of people who really like it, but most people actually don't. So as a consequence of that, I think that the market potential for that truck is limited. And it would have been much better for Elon to launch first a truck that had a much broader appeal. And that's why I think it was a strategic mistake. He's limiting his market potential on trucks. He's giving his competition a window in which they could take more share, when he could have launched a sort of an electric truck that was maybe still a little bit design forward, but a mainstream product.
And would you say he's also failing on customer value by delivering an ugly truck?
Well, I would say so. Definitely, that's part of it. I mean, the customer value isn't there. Now, there are a set of people who really love that design, but most people don't. Now, contrast that with the Model Y, I think it is, which is the crossover vehicle, which I think will be a huge success. It's not a dramatic new design. It's sort of based on the Model 3 platform, but it's a really nice car that also is all-wheel drive and has a ton of storage space, so it's super practical. And I think the Model Y is going to be a huge success because the SUV market, or in this case, it's a crossover, which is basically an SUV, is a huge market, and this is a very practical, affordable option for people who want to get into electric cars.
So, so you mentioned earlier, and you and I have chatted a little bit about this prior to our talk today. We're in this time of dramatic change, and we talked about it kind of in the context of your launch, and it's a double-edged sword. Certainly, it impacts your launch, but at the same time, I think it's this opportunity where you may get a broader reach for different people because the book may have applicability because of all the changes happening in our world. I think one of the interesting conversations that we had was around the Black Lives Matter movement that's going on currently. And so I'm wondering, on getting your thoughts, or some of your, let's say your initial thoughts on applying the framework that you have around strategy first to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. So this is a long and probably deeply difficult conversation for some, and very sort of intriguing to others. So it sort of depends which part of it you want to talk about. For one, I think there's an opportunity for businesses to take leadership and make a statement about Black Lives Matter within their company and what they do, that would be part of how they run their business, that would not only help reduce our systematic racism in our country and in business, and but also help them be more successful. Then there's the issue, which is a totally different issue, of how, if you're the leaders of the Black Lives Movement, which is pretty decentralized, how do you make that successful? You know, and what are your goals? Are you trying to achieve, you know, change in police methods in Seattle, or are you trying to make change across the country, or are you trying to achieve something totally different altogether, or multiple things? So I think when you look at this, you have to decide what it is that you're trying to achieve and set your goals, you know, as leaders of the movement, and then focus on that. And one of the interesting things about this is I'll ask people to step back and think about when Trump first got elected. Early on, there was a lot of marches, and those marches were about women's rights and immigrant rights. And it seemed like almost every weekend there was a different march about a different issue where people were very upset about the position that President Trump and the Republican Senate had. The problem was none of those really gained a lot of traction. And the reason they didn't gain a lot of traction, in my view, is because they were marching about so many different subjects that none of them could gain any traction. But here you have a tragic murder that, I mean, you have to be really cold not to have it just break your heart. And so you combine that with marches all across the country that are focused on Black Lives Matter and police, brutality, and the broader sort of, racial justice issues. And so everything all across the country is basically about the same related issues. And as a consequence, you combine that with George Floyd's tragic and just heartbreaking murder, and that gives you the focus for a more successful movement.
So shifting gears a little bit, one of your career highlights, and I know it's one of mine and it's where we cross paths, was the launch of Windows 95. Now, I know you're a big music fan. I'm a big music fan. And I think a lot of bands will kind of leave some of their best material toward the end of the concert. And I'm looking that we got about 15 minutes left. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about kind of one of the great stories of the Windows 95 launch, which is the Rolling Stones' involvement with the launch. And I think you've got a story around that to tell. So.
Yeah, I do. So when we set the goals for the launch of Windows 95, the marketing goals, we decided that we wanted to make Windows 95 a consumer phenomenon. And we would educate people about it. We would try to get them excited about it and engage them. And we did many, many things. And one of the things we did was we had the launch event on the Microsoft campus. We built basically a circus, and Jay Leno was the MC, and it was quite an amazing thing. And at that launch, we revealed the first product commercial that Microsoft had ever done, which was on Windows 95. And that commercial featured the music of the Rolling Stones, specifically the song Start Me Up. Now that whole endeavor to get Start Me Up to be the music behind the first Windows 95 commercial started back sort of in early May of 95. We had a series of meetings with the advertising agency where we were trying to come up with a concept for the ads that I would agree to. And they kept coming up with ideas that were just a little bit off the mark. But then they came up with a great idea. On the third try, they proposed the Start Me Up ad, which would build on the start button that has been so iconic for so long in Windows and was new in Windows 95, and use the music of Start Me Up. So I was excited, and I think everybody else was too. But then the ad agency said, well, we have a problem. And the problem is the Stones won't license us the rights to Start Me Up unless we sponsor their next concert tour for $10 million. And I didn't have $10 million to spend on the sponsorship of their tour. So we had a pretty heated argument. Why would you give me a ad concept that was right on target, that was really innovative? The Stones had never licensed their music before. In fact, few commercials ever even used music in, well-known music in the commercial. How could you do that and not give us a solution that we could actually use? And they said, well, we were hoping you would negotiate with the Rolling Stones. So I took the bait and I flew to Amsterdam and met with the Rolling Stones personnel in an old posh hotel in Amsterdam. And we spent all day negotiating and we didn't agree. They wanted more money. They wanted to limit how we could use they wanted to limit how you could use the music. I wanted to pay less. I wanted less limitations. And we went back and forth and didn't achieve much. So they said, well, why don't you stay tomorrow? And then tomorrow night, we have an unplugged concert, which for those who don't know is a small venue concert where there's not a lot of people. But I couldn't stay. My schedule during the days of Windows 95 was, as you might remember, Victor, quite crazy.
Yes.
So they said, why don't you just, go to the dress rehearsal tonight? And so, I did. And I remember talking to Nancy, who worked with me, Nancy Malm, and helped organize my schedule and was sort of the business manager and assistant, and telling her that I was going to go to this concert and I didn't know what to expect. So I went, and it turned out I was one of two people in the whole place that wasn't Stones personnel, and they played for 2 to 3 hours. And it was an amazing, amazing concert. Just fantastic. And they talked back and forth periodically and gave each other a hard time. But I got basically a private concert, and it couldn't have been any better. So at the end, the lead person I was negotiating with, a guy named Michael Cole, said to me, so now do you want to meet the Stones? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, no, I don't think I want to meet the Stones. I mean, after all, it had been a perfect concert, and, I didn't want to, leave it in anything but perfection. And maybe I'd meet them and it would be anticlimactic. So half the people I tell that story to say, you were an idiot. Why the heck didn't you agree to meet the Stones? And the other half say, you were a genius to agree not to meet the Stones. So people probably have their own opinions. They can put it into the chat if they want to. So then we continued to negotiate, and eventually my ad team was going apoplectic as they needed to know. And we were doing a whole backup ad campaign just in case. And I finally said to the Stones, okay, this is my final offer. I need to know by tomorrow. And they said yes. And there's more to the story, but we ended up getting the rights and running the ads, which some people still call one of the best tech ads that has ever been produced.
So, Brad, I would never call you an idiot, but that last part of the story breaks my heart.
You're not the only one. Please still be my friend.
So I was going to open it up to questions. I don't know how many questions we have, Colleen. I've got more questions, but I want to make sure that everyone's question gets answered. So, Colleen, I'm going to open it up to you.
And oh, by the way, the ad is on YouTube. If anybody wants to see it, somebody, I don't know who, not a Microsoft person, has put the ad. Start me up.
We have some young people who may not know who the Stones are, so they can also educate themselves on that.
It's just so sad. Yeah, so why don't I feed you the first question that I received. So Lisa was wondering, how do you get a product-focused company to shift their thinking to include business strategy? Are there separate and collaboration points between business and product strategy, and what are they?
So I'm going to assume for the moment that we're not talking about a commodity product. So therefore, if we're not talking about a commodity product, then the customer value your product provides is central to the success of your business strategy. So, your product or products are very, very key. So if you're going to build a business strategy, your product strategy is integral to it. And you have to decide your goals, and you have to decide what bets you're going to make with your product. And so if you decide you're going to make a bet with your product, and we talked about how Tesla, for example, made a bet that I disagree with on the Cybertruck, but I agree with on the Model Y, you got to make sure your bet is consistent with the your product strategy is consistent with the bet that you want to make. So that's what I would sort of say. The two go hand in hand. You can't pull one away from the other. Your product strategy is central to your business strategy, but your product strategy should drive from your business strategy. So, for example, let's take, Geico, for example. Their product, well, that's actually a bad example because that's sort of a commodity. So let's take, let me try to think of a good one here. Let's take Yeti. Many people are familiar with Yeti. They built sort of these industrial coolers that fishermen and other outdoor enthusiasts really like. Well, they've extended their product line to many other products. They even have really amazing water bottles, not bottles, but containers that keep water cold or hot, or other drinks cold or hot. And what they did was really smart. They started with a business strategy. They were going to do these industrial coolers that would keep product, let's say, cold for like a week. And then over time, they took the central sort of key component of that, which was a super high quality outdoor product that was made with industrial strength, and they extended it to their entire product line. And so now they have chairs, and they have these other kind of soft coolers as well as hard coolers. They have the water containers and so forth. So that's an example of where the business strategy drove the product strategy.
Perfect.
So I have a couple other questions. One is from Tots. In creating vision, which is the perspective for future? I'm just curious to know how we should learn from the past. Maybe we need to learn more from history or liberal arts with a strategic mindset. What do you think about strategy within the perspective of future products?
So there's an old saying from the hockey player Wayne Gretzky, which is, I always try to go to where the puck is going, not where it's been. And you don't have to have a business degree. A liberal arts degree can be just as helpful. But you have to think about where the business is going. And that is really critical. Let's take an example of Netflix for you, which I think is very, very illuminating. Netflix started with a bet on, hey, people are tired of, sort of late fees and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to do the famous red envelope. And I don't know if they had it around the world, but in many places. And we'll send you your CDs and you'll get a subscription and so forth. But they didn't call the company DVD Flix. They called it Netflix because they saw where the puck was going. They saw that it was going to broadband. And so they started doing streaming and licensed the rights to lots of shows. And as a consequence, they were ready as broadband became the mainstream. But then they also saw that as broadband became the mainstream, that all the content companies, the Disneys and the NBCs and the CBSs and Universal and all these different companies would end up with their own streaming services. And so Netflix, again, seeing where the puck was going, decided to create their own content and invested just a ton of money to create their own shows. So they aren't dependent on the shows of other people who, as it turned out, did build their own streaming channels. So it's really important to think about where the puck is going and think about the future. And there's no specific education that's going to get you there. It's just using your own thoughtfulness and your own creativity to think about it and maybe figure it out with your leadership team.
Fantastic. Thank you for
Thank you, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure.
One last question I have, and anyone who wants to send others, feel free. We have a couple of minutes. And I think this one's really interesting. This is from Jeremy. He asks, what is a company you're currently following that appears to be successful in how it's executing on its COVID response strategy in the sphere of marketing right now?
Well, we could pick big companies and small companies. So COVID involves a lot of luck too, right? If you're Zoom or you're the Microsoft Teams group or you're Logitech that makes, sort of webcams, You're just happen to be in the right place in the right time, and you got a lot of luck. And strategy success does involve luck. You make bets, but you never know what's going to happen, and so there's a lot of luck involved. So companies like that, I've been watching their response, and someone like Zoom, to pick a non-Microsoft example for a change, has done a pretty good job. I mean, I'm impressed on how well their product works. They got beat up on security. They quickly responded. So they've done a very good job and have been a good company to watch. Meanwhile, you take Logitech, they've been out of stock on their webcam, for like 2 months. And a couple other of their key products. They have not been able to adapt their supply chain and move more quickly as a response to COVID. And that's, I've been watching them, and that's, I think, a disappointment for them. There are small companies that have done amazing things as well. So, many of the people here are in the Seattle area, not all of them. And there's been some restaurants that have done, some pretty amazing work adjusting their business model to, go online and do amazing things. And, some high-end restaurants have even offered sort of less expensive product, knowing that no one in COVID was really looking for, sort of high-end, super expensive meals. So there's been a lot of people that I've been watching back and forth, and those are a few examples that I hope answer your question, Jeremy.
Awesome. No, that's really interesting to hear. Okay, so one last question, and then I will announce who the winner is of the free book. So Eric wants to know what you think of Microsoft's current strategy. And this isn't your son, Eric Victor. This is a different Victor, Eric.
So I'm probably not the expert anymore on Microsoft strategy, but I'm very impressed with what Satya and the leadership team has done. They're focusing on the cloud, which is, of course, central to where business is and going. There's focusing on AI, which is another sort of key sort of place the puck is going, to use the analogy for before. They have a lot of focus on mobile, which I think is also great. So they're making, a few very key bets. And I think they've done a nice job transitioning the company to sort of the post-PC era. Back in the day when I was, senior executive at Microsoft, we were just starting that, and a lot of my tenure and your tenure, Victor, we were still selling, desktop products and products that installed on the PC, and now they've adjusted with products, like Azure and Microsoft Teams, like we talked about, and Office 365, which I think now is Microsoft 365.
Yep.
As well. So really great job by Microsoft. I'm super impressed, and I'm in a position where I could be much more objective, and I think they've done a really great job.
All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. Before you and Victor wrap up and I step away, I just want to announce that Ignacio, let me get your last name, Davila, you have won the free book, as you answered strategy as part of your answer without knowing Brad personally, as far as we know. So kudos to you there. And
I just also want to interrupt to say I'm sorry to Jim and Dave for maybe taking away their free book, but I hope they'll understand.
But I will send an email to you, Ignacio, and I will let Brad and Victor wrap up and say goodnight.
All right, Brad, I want to thank you for spending your time with us. We're on the eve of your launch. I wish you much success with this book. I know that this is a labor of love, and I'm really glad that you were able to spend this time with us. And Lori and I both appreciate your support and Judy's support of our bookstore and our local community. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I would say that, we've been Island Book fans for a long time and are big fans of Victor and Lori. So if you're interested in the book and you don't have it, Island Books would be a great place to get it from. And I've had them ship books all over the place. So they ship the books for free, and At least I hope you still do, because
We do. We do.
Yeah. And so that so you could send it to people, a great graduation gift or a Father's Day gift, for that matter, for the upcoming Father's Day holiday.
Agreed. So thank you, Brad, and thank you everyone for joining us. So, we've had a great turnout for this, and we're glad that so many people could join us for this event. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks.